I'm now pleased to bring a panelist onto the stage. Please help me in welcoming Director of Action Station and co-founder and chair of Rock and Roll, Laura O'Connell-Rapira. Senior Lecturer, Design Director, Design and Democracy Project, Massey University, Carl Kane. Chief Executive, Super Diversity Institute for Law at Chen Palmer, Marina Matthews. Senior Advisor, External Relations, AT Chair and Auckland District Licensing Agency and former Councillor of the Auckland Council, Michael Gouldie. Did I say your surname right?
It's like the car with a G in front of it, Gouldie.
Oh, Gouldie. Oh, sorry, apologies. Michael Gouldie, ladies and gentlemen. And also journalist currently editing of the new local elections pop-up section of the spin-off and awesome website, Hayden Donnell. And before we kick into this conversation, I'd just like to get a show of hands with our audience and wonder who here has voted in a local body election? Okay, thank you. Who hasn't? Shame, Oscar, shame. Wow, that's interesting. And so I guess I want to ask, to kick us off, I'd like to ask each of you the same question, just to start this conversation. Why? Why do you think not many people vote? Laura, can we start with you? Or actually, anybody who wants to go ahead, but I want to ask that of each of you. Why don't we vote? Or why don't enough of us vote?
Kia ora, everyone. So I think the reason's really complex. So for the last 5 years, I've been working on a campaign called Rock and Roll, which my flatmates and I started because we were wanting to make political engagement more interesting to people in our age group. And so I was an event organizer at the time. I was primarily interested in organising parties that raised funds for environmental charities. And that's what I saw as my offering to doing something meaningful, and decided to translate that model into running parties. We did this at the general election in 2014 all around the country, where the only way a person could get a ticket is if they made a promise to vote. We weren't trying to get them to vote for a particular political party, we were just trying to get them started in the voting habit. And so making a promise meant filling in a form that basically gave us their name, their email, their phone number, and ticking a box that says, I promise to vote in the election. And then in the weeks leading up to the election, we'd give them a call to say, hey, have you actually voted? And in planning that, we dug into the research into why young people don't vote. And actually, if you look at the demographics of the people who are least likely to vote, it's people who are Māori, it's people who are Pacifica, it's people who have recently migrated to New Zealand, it's people from low income or low education backgrounds, and it's people who live in rural areas. And if you look at the reasons for each of those groups, it's actually very complex. So for Māori, a lot of it has to do with an intergenerational distrust of the Crown and its agents due to our colonial history. If you look at Pacifica,
that's a biggie.
Yeah. If you look at Pacifica people, it was a lack of a sense of belonging, because when a lot of the migration from the Pacific to New Zealand happened, we sort of just put them in one place and left them, and then raided them, early in the morning, and have never apologised for that. And so the reasons are really, really complex. And then when it comes to local government, I think one of the additional factors over the last 10, 15 years, which I think Hayden can speak more to as well, is that we no longer buy newspapers, which means that there's no longer advertising revenue for newspapers, which means that newsrooms have shrunk, and there are fewer and fewer journalists able to cover what's going on in local government. And because of that, we're not hearing about what's happening, and therefore it's more difficult to engage. And so that just gives a sense of how many complex factors there are involved in why people don't vote. The other thing, of course, that's happening globally is a swing towards populism and the return of Nazis, frankly, and that's terrifying. And so, we live in a society that has so far failed to deliver the types of changes for marginalised people, and people are starting to lose faith in that and look to strong men, authoritarian alternatives to the status quo, and that's concerning.
Thank you, Laura. Wow. As you say, that's mad complex. Carl.
Yeah, kia ora, te whare tēnei tēnā koe. why don't people vote? I'll go a bit more meta. I think that if you look at the systems we have of governance in Aotearoa, and look at where we've got them from and when we got them from, if is that a thing? When we got them from? But the systems and structures we imported from 17th, 18th century England, Westminster modes of representative democracy. And then we look at our Pacific context as in the 21st century, our digitally connected, deliberative, immediate, these very different lives. So we've got very old tools, old political tools, and we're asking this generation to engage with these very old tools. And I'm not sure they can. I'm not sure that they are able to look at the things they want to affect and the change they want to affect in the world and see that once every 3 years ticking a box is a way of achieving that. So I think we've got some issues with the structures, and I think there are some ways that Rangatahi in particular can hack into those structures to make them more their own and more useful to them. But currently I think, we've got the wrong tools for the job, and we're approaching the tools we have in a really clumsy way. So I think we can do better with what we got, but ultimately when people do turn up and vote, we can start to evolve those tools and make them a little bit more suitable for a 21st century use.
Thank you, Ka.
Well, mihi maira kia koutou katoa, aha ko he mihi iti, he mihi mahana kia koutou. I guess I would follow on from what Carl had said and say that I think the importance of voting starts in school and with good civics education. And if you don't have your children or your tamariki or your rangatahi learning about the importance of voting, then they won't enrol and then they won't vote. I mean, I was just looking at the title before, voting, why bother? It should go a step back, enrolling, why do it? So that you can vote, why bother? Because you can't vote if you're not enrolled. And I think that the importance of civics education is not only to learn about our history, Aotearoa's history, but also to learn about the importance of a democracy and having our part, or letting the children know about their part in New Zealand and Aotearoa's democracy.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm Gowdy. I might just read from Hayden's notes on this one. What they said. No, honest. I think actually largely you've picked up a lot. Particularly, I think that educational piece is huge. And I'm from Rodney, fairly grew up Coromandel provincial, and I think you even just been on the fringes of the city where it's probably more. There's more awareness than that. I just didn't know about it. Like I had no idea. I didn't know what it entailed, and I probably, if I hadn't, if one particular thing hadn't piqued my interest, I probably would remain with that unwashed mass and just let things go. I think local government particularly has, it's not as sexy, it's got a bit of a bad rap, it's this big beast that sits in town and the wheels churn, and it's that old, well, how am I going to be able to influence it anyway? And to the contrary, I think your ability to influence because no one really participates is huge. So I think it's like heaps of things I think in New Zealand where there actually needs to be a bit of a culture change, and that isn't a quick fix over a couple of elections, and it needs to start deep, and it is extremely complex on a whole lot of levels. So I think the one piece that I always go back to was I got through. Well, I dropped out, failed high school, but
What school did you go to?
Orewa College.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not a good one. The one that got all the expellees from all the other ones.
Yeah.
So I think even when I got through to finally when a university would take me, I still didn't really know about what local government was or is or how it lived in my day-to-day. And so, I think that educational piece from really, and we see, offshore they do it really well, and probably they've got some other mechanisms, but that educational piece is key, I think. Yep.
Thank you. Hayden?
I just think everyone else really got all the good ones, especially Laura. I feel like you kind of hogged a few right up front.
Yeah,
It was
I
quite
won't
annoying.
ask her first next
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably local government in general is probably just seen as really boring, particularly by young people. I mean, I was talking to a guy the other day. He's like a young lawyer, so he's pretty highly engaged, and he's just like, oh, you're editing the Spinoff's local government section. It was like a pitying tone. like are really pitying, going like, oh, how are you going to survive? And I was talking to you about being a counsellor, and you were bored as hell. So I mean, there is a, I mean. But my hot take is actually that local government is actually probably more exciting than central government. Like what's central government doing? It's like working out the structure of PHOs or something. You know, that's not interesting either. It's just that there's interesting people there. And a cycleway coming to your door is far more interesting than that, or over the harbour bridge, or a new park or something. That's actually going to make a difference to my life, but people don't give a hoot. Yeah, and I guess that message isn't coming through. Maybe that does come back to what you say is this kind of staid. I don't know. I don't give the media too much credit. We're useless, but I mean, we probably do have some kind of an influence. Like there is a staid media environment. I think probably I love him. He's a lovely guy, but Bernard Osmond has kind of terrorised Auckland for multiple decades of just these local representatives that are focused on rates and these small issues of where they're constantly terrorised about having a vision, being criticised for it, and that probably has made a difference. We've had multiple decades in Auckland in particular of local representatives that had small ideas, and we're still making up for it. We built a 4-lane harbour bridge. Oh yeah, sorry. I feel I got depressed. I'm sorry. Anyway, people probably alienated from the system a little bit.
Yeah, because I remember reading once about Mayor Robbie. Anyone remember Sir W. Robinson? And he had a... You were... Wow.
Richard, don't show
Did you vote against the trams and all that, the rail?
And he... I remember reading an article once, and he was saying that two things he really wanted to do was light rail and a line of palm trees up Queen Street. And I think most people at that time were like, oh, it'll cost too much, which seems to be the public's answer to everything.
Oh, that's the way we cover it as well. It's like, how much does it cost? You know, it's not like, what kind of city are we trying to build? And probably that has embedded quite a bad culture. I don't think your issues were much more important, but that might be something too.
It seems there was a lot of really awesome answers, and I wonder whether, do you think it's fair to kind of group a kind of essence of all those answers as a disconnect between the people and the process? Would that be a fair summation of some of those answers?
Did anyone talk about how bad the postal system is for young people as well?
I think we're getting there.
Yeah. That's bad too.
I think that goes to the structures as well. Like, right, we're taking post boxes away from communities while asking people to conduct a postal ballot.
That's
like,
crazy.
Yeah.
Most young people haven't seen a letter. What are this is the thing. You've got a postal system. You've got 80-year-olds that have lived in the same house for 40 years. They're going to be enrolled. They're going to be in the same place. They're going to get their voting papers sent. A young person might have moved flat 4 times in the last 3 years. That's because they got kicked out by the guy that's been living in his house for 40 years. It's their investment property. So I mean, I don't have the solution to what's a better system, but.
Wow, I'm from Invercargill, and you may have noticed that I talk a bit different. And I feel that these are really Auckland-related issues. And I don't know what our two Wellington colleagues...
Kia ora.
Because I was just thinking that in Invercargill, for example, it has, I think, it's about 85% participation rate in voting. But that's possibly because they've got such a big personality with Mayor Tim Shadbolt. And when he first came into the city council down in Invercargill, he had said that he was going to push a concrete mixer through the main streets of Invercargill. He was quite clever because he didn't define what main streets were, and he only went up and down one particular street. But all the elderly, all the young people, all the people in between, they all went and saw him push. I went, and I was about 5.
Was there not much else happening in the Invercargill
So it's the same.
on that day? Marina.
I got the same theory.
Come on,
Why?
kids, the
It's why
mayor's pushing a concrete mixer. Let's all go out.
It's why the Blues suck, because there's too many things to do in Auckland. So when you're in the deep south, you've got some good, strong rugby teams down there. Yeah. It's not much else to do.
I guess there's so many fantastic questions coming in, and I'll get to some of those after this next round of questions from each of you. The talk always turns to solutions. Laura, what could central and local government do to make participating in democracy more meaningful and inclusive, given we all want that and we all accept that it's going to take a culture change?
So I think there's a number of things. I do think education is one part of it. I do stress that it is just one part of it, though, because whilst I think, like, the US has had civics education in their schools for quite a long time, and it's not exactly... So I think citizenship is one part of it, and when I say that, when I say citizenship, I mean it goes beyond civics. It's not just like the mechanics of local government or central government and how it works and how many MPs there are and what a select committee is and all that kind of stuff. It's like the power of social movements. Who is Eva Rickard? What was Parihaka? How did that happen? All those sorts of things. Bastion Point. You know, I think it would be really awesome to learn about social movements and the role that people, ordinary people, have played in affecting change in New Zealand. So I think that's one part of it. I also think it's about practice from a young age. So still in high schools, young people don't actually get to vote for who their head boy or the head girl is. They get to vote for their student representative on the Board of Trustee, but they don't vote for the head boy or head girl that's appointed. And so we don't even actually practice voting in schools, which seems quite flawed.
I never knew that. So the teachers pick the head. Wow.
Yeah, they do. And then for the student, the person who does end up getting onto the Board of Trustees, the student rep, they're usually just one person among 6 to 12 parents or adults, and then so they're the lone voice, and so their first experience of governance isn't necessarily that great either, because they're the sole voice advocating for that. And so I think at the school level it will be really great to put in place that we have 2 student representatives on each board so that they feel supported in that. So I think there's a couple of structural things that we could do. But I also think, like, one of the reasons why I think voter turnout is higher in places like Invercargill is because there's still quite strong community ties there. And in a population as diverse and widespread as Auckland, it's quite hard to achieve those community ties. And there's a really interesting and quite terrifying piece of research that was done by Unitec in West Auckland, studying people's responses to of perceptions of crime in their community, and then support for certain responses to those perceptions of crime. And basically what they found is that older Pākehā, usually men who spent a lot of time on social media, were more likely or more inclined to support punitive measures. So they were more likely, A, to think that there was more crime in their community and that their communities were more affected by crime, and then therefore more likely to support more policing in that area. Whereas more people of colour from those same communities were less likely to perceive that there was a lot of crime in their community, and also therefore more likely to support greater investment in community events. And so alongside ethnic background being one of the things, it was also about social media use. And so I think if we think about the role that social media plays in, it's meant to bring us together, but it also is radicalising some people and pushing us into bubbles and sort of isolating us. How can we use the tools that we have today, and this is something that I think Carl's really great at, the internet, to bring communities closer together rather than polarise us and push us apart?
Thank you, Lord. Carl, generally speaking, the younger you are, it seems the least likely you are to vote. There's all these usual stereotypes about young people, lazy, self-absorbed. That's just me. Or are there other reasons they don't turn out to vote?
Noam Chomsky was on Radio New Zealand a couple of years ago talking to Kim Hill, and he made a really, really important point that there are more young people engaged in direct political action and activity now than in 1968. And when we think about 20th century history in the late 60s, we imagine this zeal and this revolutionary moment in time, and there are more young people engaged in direct political action activity now than there were in the late 60s. They just do it differently. and this goes back to the structure and the tools, the levers that they have to pull. They're more likely to be conscious consumers. They're more likely to be activists or take direct action towards an active an oil company or a sweatshop using company. They're more likely to take a direct type of action than they are to wait 3 years to tick a box and hope.
They're all about doing something now.
They want to do something now, but I think that's really important because we underutilise this talent. We've got this wonderful pool of talent. They've also got the most to gain or lose, right? They're going to be alive the longest. If we fuck it up now, they're the ones who've got to live with the consequences. And if we get it right now, they're the ones who get to to reap the rewards of the investment now, even if it is a higher cost. And that's the thing which the media foreground. But the kids are all right, and I think that after Christchurch we saw that. And I think a lot of older voters were really impressed by Rangatahi in Christchurch.
People just love hating on young people, eh?
Yeah, but they don't turn out. But I'm going to say this is my one point I want to labour because this is my kaupapa.
You've already quoted Noam Chomsky.
Fuck, awesome. So if I look at how young people are educated in schools today, they're taught to be collaborative, deliberative, to reach consensus, and to work together to build something. And then I look at how politics is presented. It's adversarial, it's red versus blue, blood versus Crips. Parliament is 2 tribes separated by a man with a mace. That's some Game of Thrones shit, and we expect our young people who have this different education to look at that and go, I'm in. And they're not. And so I think the better behaved politicians, and we are in civics and how we talk about it, the more deliberative and open and honest and evidence-based that we can be, the more we're going to get those rangatahi to vote, because they are engaged, they're just not ticking the box.
Can I ask Carl a question then? What do you think the difference of our young central government MPs makes, like Chloe Swarbrick, for example?
I reckon in that lies the seed of actually getting them to tick the box. I think we need to make a compelling argument that once you're inside the tent, once you're sitting at the table, we can evolve these things, that they're not concrete. There's a sense that these things are immutable, unchangeable, processes and structures and systems and traditions, but they can all be changed. And watching, when I see cross-party, the homosexual law reform was a good example. When I see this cross-party consensus and stuff coming together, that's what gets them going. So, I think people like Chloe, it's a really good example of someone going into the tent and changing things from the inside. So I think it's that old thing in social justice, if I can't see it, I can't be it, right? So that little bit of modelling, I think, is really, really good.
Laura, you mentioned crime before, and last week there was an incident at St. Luke's, and it was very sad for the people that were affected that the Michael Hill Jewellers was broken into. But on the other hand, the young offenders caught the train. So they're using public transport, which is great. They caught the train to Ranui. Not casting aspersions on people from Ranui. Marina, at the last Auckland local government elections, there were approximately 70% of European voters who voted. European, I guess that means Pākehā as well, not just people from Europe. However, for other ethnicities, the participation was significantly lower. In the Chinese community, 57% of voters. For Māori, 50%. For Samoan, 46%. What can we do to increase voter participation across all ethnicities, given that, and when you look at Māori, Pacific, and Asian, they make up 50% of Auckland's population, and there are over 200 ethnicities in Auckland?
That's a good question. One of the things is that in the 2013 census, and I'm not going to talk about the 2018 census because I keep getting told off, but in the 2013 census, there was 87,000 people who couldn't speak English. And they were, 80,000 people in Auckland who couldn't speak any English. They didn't have any English-speaking ability. They weren't ESOL, English as a second language. They just couldn't speak it. And one of the things about those stats that you just said, Oscar, is that we need to make it easier for people with English as a second language or no English, to vote. And I could bore you with Regulation 34 of the local election regulations.
I love that one. Go on. Remind us.
Which says that you have to be able to vote. You can have a special vote if you can't speak English. But the other option is, the other concern about that regulation is that it doesn't say any requirements for the person that is with you, watching you doing or translating that vote for you. They don't have any obligation to keep your vote a secret. So we at the Super Diversity Institute, we've done some research and we've seen that quite a lot of people are put off by the fact that their translator could then tell their vote to every man and his dog. So I think making the enrolment forms accessible to different languages. I think, did you say that there's 163 different languages spoken in Auckland? So making the enrolment information different languages, and then making the voting forms in different languages. I mean, I know that we do have like Māori, Pacifica, Chinese, but there are 163 different languages.
What do you think? What do you think about automatic enrolment? Meaning that if you like get a driver's license or a passport or anything like that, then they automatically enrol you, and so then it's opt out rather than opt in.
That's a fantastic idea. Yeah.
Are you running this year?
Something that I obviously support and am proposing.
I think there's such a, and I've thought so I'm in stakeholder management, and you think about when you're impacting communities, the links you go to for just different engagement or partnership plans for all types of communities, whether it's building the Waterview Tunnel, you think about all the schools, communities, ethnicities, all that, and you are consciously coming up with ways of how you include them within that. And we probably, the Invercargill to Auckland phase is we are so disconnected, and I think we probably have got a long way to go in terms of coming up with recognising the different cultural values and how then particularly voting or local government might impact those values and why you would get enthused. And that's a task for a small army in itself. But if you could tackle that would be another good initiative.
When I look at those stats, when you think of the chunk of the community that isn't being represented, and I guess that's quite sad. And sorry, Maureen, I'll come back to you in a sec. But Michael, how does voter turnout impact the quality of elected members?
Yeah, this is... Well, so I was guilty by association, being an elected member. And I guess, look, I would put almost my business hat on when I think about this, because often a lot of people think, oh, well, why would I vote from the voting side? When you're an elected member, who's your market, right? So who's your voting market? So if you're in business, you've got a product, who are you marketing it to? And it's not too dissimilar. And I've got a lot of friends even in this room who are elected members, and they're probably part of the cream, from all extremes. But they're the types of elected members you probably want, who are active, engaged. They might not be my way inclined, or I might not agree, but actually I don't care because they're just engaged and they're representing their community. Good job. But how many times do I talk to a politician and you talk about an issue and you kind of know socially where it should be at, and they're like, oh, but why would they don't vote? Like, why would I'm not going to go down that, I'm not going to go fight in that corner.
So did you focus on the people that do turn out, or?
Well, I think I was an outlier, only in the fact that somehow I could get in, but I felt very lonely or isolated even in this beast of council, because I felt like I represented a silent, not majority, but just my community, to be honest. But my community weren't engaged at all. So often, you go years on end in this beast trying to represent people that aren't there. They're not there to vote. They don't care. And so you're kind of the only one sort of holding your hand up. And so that's an outlier, I think, view. where you could look at the other 80% of your elected representatives, and I don't need to ask the question, well, I'm not proud of our entirety of elected members. Like, it could be a lot better. Honestly, like
You were
it's
the
not.
Richard Hills before Richard Hills, eh?
But I'm not, and it's not, I'm not that way inclined to stay in there and be that. And there's others that are here today that are, they're fighting the fight, man. And even to go through silly season right now in elections, it's not a nice place to be in. So I think we know that we have very low turnout, and we know the quality of our elected members. We know the quality of our decision makers. We know. And there's something inherently broken. Now, what's going to change that? A bigger market. So from an elected member's point of view, or from a voter point of view, you inherently want more people to vote, because that's the change, that's the accountability, that's the exposure, that's the interest, that's the engagement. And I think that would only lead to more contestability and more people being interested in running. And I think you would still get people electing those parts of the community that need to be, and right through to having good quality decision makers, which leads to, leads to better outcomes.
So it does affect the quality of
100%. 100%. Do we want to stay in at 38% and turn up to a local board meeting and only 3 of them are actually engaged?
It's the incentives, eh? Like, I feel like some councillors that are doing really good progressive change are almost doing kind of charity work in a way, because they're just making it harder for themselves. Like, because you look at the stats, I can go into them, I wrote them down. But like, I mean, the easy way to get in is to appeal to old Pākehā people. And, and
Mine was middle-aged woman.
yeah,
Honestly,
yeah.
honestly, a great voter turnout from my area, and it was like, well, that's the easy market. That came out real bad. But that was
Tap to the cougar market.
like,
Didn't know this would go there.
I guess that's smart, though, Michael. I guess
I
that's
might
clever.
leave now.
Because they vote.
There's an easy way to get, if you're a local board, you can get in on 1,000 votes. 1,000 votes.
Is that all?
Yeah, if that in some local board areas.
I'm
So
running.
it's like, well, actually, I think this is the other thing. People think it's a lot more daunting or a lot bigger than what it actually is. If you think you can represent your community better, no matter where you're from, what age you are, you've got a real good shot of getting in. Like, it's pretty incredible.
That's actually really encouraging. Hey.
You do it. Go on.
Yeah. I will.
You heard it here.
I've got till tomorrow. Marina, I saw you have your mic up before. Were you going to chime in with something?
Oh, no, I was going to say that, adding to Michael's question about quality of candidates, I mean, given that Auckland is 50% Asian Pacific and Māori, we need to see more people or more representation in our candidates from those communities. As Michael says, there are a lot of Pākehā. I remember Hekia Parata used to say that they're pale, stale males. And there are a lot of pale,
Sorry, say that again. Pale.
stale and male.
Whoa, full on.
Also known as the CEOs of all the CCOs.
He works for CEOs.
I want to get to some of these questions that have come through, and here's a really interesting one. Why not make voting compulsory?
I think if you're going to make voting compulsory, you have to make space for people who don't see themselves represented in any of the options available, because if you're making people do something by compulsion, I don't know. Firstly, I feel quite uncomfortable about that. For reasons I can't yet articulate. But so there's a cool TED talk that's put forward by, I can't remember his name. He's a UK journalist, and he talks about this idea that what if so there's 120 seats in central government and parliament, and let's say 30% of people don't vote, then the equivalent number of seats would have to stay empty, and then political parties and candidates would have to try and find out what those 30% of people who didn't vote actually want, and then try and vie for their votes, which I think would be a much more kind of responsive, participatory way of running things, as opposed to like just forcing people into choosing options, in which case, if they're forced to choose an option, where's the option to say, I don't like any of yous, you know? And so I think that aspect of things is quite important. But on the diversity thing in Auckland, I think like one of the other things to note is that's really important about is class. So in 2015, Statistics New Zealand found that the median net worth of an individual Pākehā person was 114,000. Median Māori 23,000, median Pasifika person 14,000, and so you have a $100,000 gap between the median Pasifika person and the median
it's like
Pākehā.
we're all actors.
Yeah, and so and so we have to think about like one of the things I've been thinking quite a lot about with the election access funding bill that Mojo Mathers put through, which is basically a pool of funds that candidates and political parties can apply for. It's in its second reading in central government at the moment to make their events more accessible to people with disabilities. So if you're a person with disability, with a disability who wants to run for central or local government, you can apply for that. If you're wanting a person to do sign language interpretation at your event, you can apply for that, so on and so forth. And I started thinking about what would it look like if we had an equivalent fund for young people, for ensuring that young people can actually participate, because we have these huge ethnic gaps or a racial wealth gap, let's say, but we also know from that same Statistics New Zealand data that young people overall have the lowest median net worth of all age demographics. So it's about $1,000. Many have accumulated student debt and don't have any assets yet. And so if we're serious about getting more young people to participate, we have to wrap the support around them so that they can actually do that. And so that's for young people, but also for people from different ethnic backgrounds as well.
Who else would like to chime in on that? Why don't we make voting compulsory? Is that a road we could take?
I think we could do better than that. I think it's a little bit like kiss your auntie stuff. Like like democracy is pretty special, and a lot of people have fought very hard for it, and it's an amazing privilege to be part of. And I think if we did all the things which have been suggested, we teach civics better, we empower people, we engage them, we use the tools and techniques that we have better and more deliberately and more openly. And I think we don't need to do that. I think that making it compulsory...
Has it worked in Aussie?
Well, no, it hasn't worked in Aussie, and the quality of vote, which is an awful thing to say, but the quality of vote is low. And I'm actually...
That's Aussies, though.
Yeah, but I'm actually okay with someone electing... So values judgment, but I'm actually okay with someone electing not to vote. If they've thought about it, they've seen the options, they've enrolled, and they've actually spoiled the ballot, they've made some kind of protest vote. I'm okay with that. I think it's a valid political act, and I don't think that forcing me to kiss my auntie is the way to bring.
What
some
if your
romance.
auntie's hot?
What? Sorry.
She's not.
So I really like what you said.
I hope your auntie's not watching.
No, I just wanted to reinforce what Laura said. It's an opt-out system.
Yeah.
Instead of an opt-in. Sounds really good. It sounds like a compromise between the two extremes, where now it's almost impossible for some people to vote. Who knows how to use a postal box? And, where you actually have to make a considered decision if you don't want to vote.
Hayden, we all know...
Can I just jump in?
Yes,
Sorry. I think we don't want to skim over this postal thing too. Like even within, Ruhi, in Wellington we have STV, a different system from first past the post in Auckland. The complications of working out how that system works. If we do get these, I'm going to tell you, engaged and involved, and they're there and they're ready, and then we ask them to work out the magic strategy of how am I going to cast this vote and what's the impact going to be. Let alone getting to the post box, wherever the fuck that is. But that's a complex system.
That's why John Key's flag referendum was such a service to the nation.
What do you
really
mean?
Taught us about STV ranking.
Hayden,
Same concept.
I feel like, this is a room with a big choir who realise this is important, and we know these things are going to take time and a culture shift. But I guess, Hayden, what do you, this election's next month, and there are things that need to be, it'd be great if we could suddenly overnight flip the turnout so that the next election had a higher participation. What do you think is at stake at this election, particularly for Auckland's young people?
I think first of all it's just representation. I mean, what are the stats? I wrote them down. I mean, the average age on council, I'm going to read it. 75% of candidates are over 45. 76% of elected representatives are Pākehā compared to 60% of Auckland's population. It's reasonably dire, and I've kind of got a bee in my bonnet lately. You'll be surprised, but just about the number of projects that council handles, and Richard will know this, you'll know this, that are for the distant future. They're 30-year projects. You're thinking about rail to the North Shore, and these are projects that are primarily for young people. I'm sorry, old people, but you are going to die. And they are the ones that are primarily deciding whether we in the future are going to be able to have cycleways and rail over the harbour. Come on. It's ridiculous. Of course we should, but they put it off. You know, we are letting people that won't have a stake in the future decide our future. And I find that a little bit annoying, though I think they should probably still have votes. I mean, just the other point is I just think that the council in particular, and this is boring probably to anyone but me who's sad nerd, but like the council's in a reasonably precarious situation this time around. I think there's been a consensus over the last probably 6 years, which is in favour of a compact city based around public transport, you know, and that's been advanced in a really, even though it's probably felt really slow, but there's been reasonable progress on that. And if a few electorates this time round flip, then that could go away. Or there's lots of people in local government that have made whole careers out of saying no to things because it's easy and it's popular and it appeals to older Pākehā voters. I'm really sorry, but there are a crew out there that just want to say no to things and want to hold back change, and it's conservative. And I think that is a risk, and you can see it a little bit in the mayoral race, not that that's the main thing, but where John Tamahiri is accusing Phil Goff of having an anti-car strategy and this kind of thing. It's this, let's pull it back and let's make Auckland what it used to be. And we've tried that way of thinking. We tried it for multiple decades, and it's why our city is fucked now. And it's what we're trying. We've tried to be conservative, and we made a 4-lane harbour bridge, and we pulled up the tramways, and and so yeah. I mean, that it's not that dramatic, but I want to sound a warning.
Can I just jump in a bit?
Yep.
Because I don't think it's that bleak. Quite that bleak. That was a bit
Apocalyptic.
bit dark.
I'm really sorry.
I just think we're in a really interesting time, I think, particularly in local government sense, particularly in Auckland sense. I think I wouldn't have rerun out of the old Rodney District Council if the Super City hadn't happened. And I think the Super City, it sort of jacked the votes a bit because it was of interest. And then it went straight back down to probably trending the wrong way. I think the last 3 years has been probably the first solid 3 years of elected members on social and communicating in a completely different way. So I think in 2000 and whenever it was, I think when we're throwing around Facebook signs on our billboards and we were the only ones doing it. We're now, I probably only think it's the last 3 years that I think elected members have sort of switched on to using it properly to engage with communities. So much easier to get to know a representative, not just the BS that they put through and X amount of words in a pamphlet that comes out before elections. So I do hope that it's coming back. And you think about some of the real hot issues that have been floating around the city, not just in Central, and even the play over all the investments coming to Central. What does that mean for Rodney or Manukau or wherever it would be? I think these are you're starting to get a little bit more involvement. Now, the major hurdle to that is just decent participation. So, we put out an annual plan, and we've touched on it, the archaic nature of how we engage with, which often is actually guided by legislation. around what does a submission look like and blah, blah, blah. Actually, there's way better ways to tap into communities to actually have active civic participation. And we're still stuck in this sort of self-perpetuating system that isn't allowing you to actually, allowing you to sort of penetrate in and what you think is make a difference. So I'd hope that, and I've been described as unnatural optimistic, so I'll just put that out there.
I've heard that about you, Mike.
It's my bio on one of those social places. But I think there's going to be a better turnout this year. Think about Tekapuna, Manukau, some of these quite hot issues and the involvement that council has in that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a better turnout. And I think the fact that we are getting a lot more exposure, it is a lot more front of mind beyond the local rag. I would think that we are on hopefully a better transition. Hopefully.
A question's come through here. Why is electronic voting not available in this election cycle? I think Marguerite could maybe speak more to that when she wraps up, but I think there was a move by a group of councils in the North Island, but the cost was prohibitive and cost too much, and central government wouldn't come in, so I think it was shelved. But do you think that's a good idea? Do you think central government does need to come to the party, or that's in council's best interest to actually make this a reality?
Well, how do you define best interest? Because you could cut that a lot of different ways. Government could change that overnight. Honestly, there's so many more sensitive transactions I've done in the last week online than the risk around who I'm going to vote for in my local elections. And I'm not an IT whiz. I don't know two ways about anything, but surely there's a lot of levers and mechanisms we could pull. I don't. It's part of my reason I kind of like a bit even disconnected from all that. Like it seems to be such a no-brainer. I just don't get why it hasn't been done.
Even if it does cost a few million.
I don't think it would work because in Estonia they've had e-voting for quite a while, and it had a great effect on turnout at the beginning when it was novel, and then it's done what all the other democracies have done, and voter decline has continued. And so, and if we had it, we'd have to do it with our Real Me accounts, which is actually not that easy. And so, like, I don't actually think it would be lowering that many barriers. I actually worry quite a lot about the tech because all of my friends who are very tech savvy worry about it, and so I just sort of trust them. And it's sort of one of those things like you could put it online, but it fundamentally doesn't fix all of the inequities that I've been describing today about the reasons why people don't vote. It doesn't fix colonisation. It doesn't fix intergenerational distrust between the Crown and Māori. It doesn't, fix the driver licensing issue, which is one of the issues, one of the reasons young people, particularly in rural areas, don't vote, is they just simply cannot get to a place to vote because they don't have their own cars, or they don't have a driver's licence, or they have to work on the farm and no one's going to take them to post their vote or give their vote or things like that. So, yeah, moving voting online won't fix any of those problems. And I think it's one of those things that we sort of jump to as a silver bullet, but there's no such thing.
I know that I said that I wasn't going to mention it, but 2018 census. I mean, it's just... And I mean, I know that, having talked to Liz McPherson, the chief statistician, there were lots of positive learnings that came out of their first online survey, online census, but they didn't have a high turnout. I mean, I would agree with online or e-voting if it was coupled with postal and if it was coupled with ballot boxes. I mean, you couldn't just have it by itself.
And if I could add one thing to that, if you're going to make online voting the only way of voting, then internet access becomes a human right, and that's a big commitment. And just to take what you're saying about trust, I think trust is vital. A lot of this is to do with, and this is the pointy-headed stuff, it's to do with the social contract. And even the language used, I know I'm in Auckland, but talking about the market and, talking about, customers and stuff, these are citizens we're talking about, and I think that language matters, and it's part of the social contract which can be broken. And post-Cambridge Analytica, post-Brexit and the interference and, fake news and all that stuff, there is a trust issue. And if we do put voting online, we're taking a really sacred and important thing and we're putting it into a space that people don't trust, increasingly don't trust. And I worry about that. I hold this active voting, really high. And if anything, I'd do the opposite. I'd ceremonialise it. I'd make it like an event, make it a really cool thing.
Like free beers.
Fuck, I don't care. Like free number one pancakes, man. But I think that the silver bullet is just a really tempting quick fix.
I guess I wasn't. It's just one tool. I think that should be. It feels so archaic the way that we are, and it was just another tool. And actually, the trust thing is really interesting. I was talking to a mate about putting his money in KiwiBank, and even that he was like, "No way, it's government." And even I was sort of like, there is something entrenched and inherent in this trust issue, and I think that does play a big part in it.
Look at Hayden's face. He's cringing.
Hayden, why are you cringing?
Oh, no, I just think he should put his money in KiwiBank. It's fine. On this, I mean, I just think that probably an on-the-day ballot would be a useful addition, at least in the same style as a national election. Because, come on, and people should have time off to go to it. And we should encourage that. And, I mean, that would probably increase things overall, and I think that Labor has recently announced that they're going to have ballot boxes on the day at countdowns and pack and saves and that. That would probably help a lot as well, if you could enrol to vote after doing your shop and cast a special vote.
I think the council has, they're doing lots of things, but they've got these things called one-stop shops where if you miss enrolment, which is tomorrow, in order to get your postal papers, you can still enroll on the day and vote straight away. And they're going to be at places like the night markets or the malls or places where the community gathers. So it's not from a lack of trying, I feel. Here's an interesting question. I guess it's kind of been part of the national discussion as well, but it's just an interesting question to think about. But prisoners voting. Ooh, yes. Marina made her face. Laura?
I mean, yes, obviously they should vote because, and also we should abolish prisons. So I know one's less, it's that thing where you propose a much more radical idea to make that one seem far less radical. But we should, by 2040, abolish prisons. No, I think, it's been found to be, it's like it goes against human rights. It's found to be unconstitutional. And the Waitangi Tribunal report found that it is it's a breach of the treaty. And so, to me, it seems like a no-brainer. And I'm assuming that the reason that Jacinda has come out with the position that she's come out with is because of New Zealand First and their desire to keep the law and order votes. And I just wish there was a bit of honesty in the coalition about that, because it's so obvious that that's the reason why. And I just wish she was like, I really support this, but Winnie's holding me back. And I just feel that that would be a much more authentic statement than what has been said. And I find that frustrating.
I think it follows the restorative justice approach. Like we claim to be a restorative justice nation, and if we're going to want someone to feel that the job of being in prison, their role, their side of the bargain of being in prison is to leave, ready to re-engage with society. That it's to engage as citizens. So to have this sort of arbitrary disconnection from civic life and civic society. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I'd much rather. It'd be worse to make them read books about local body politics.
Just make them all read Spin-Off.
Give them my section. Oh man, they
make
won't
them read
after
Hayden's section of Spin-Off. Yeah, it does seem a bit odd, that one. And going back to something you said earlier, Laura, our low participation rate, is that a symptom? And rather than treating the symptoms,
prison is an example of us treating the symptoms. So over 90% of the people that we lock in prisons have a mental health distress or addiction issue. I think it's 64% of people have had some kind of traumatic brain injury compared to just 2% of the general population. And so prison is our failure to adequately fund mental health. And so we just sort of put them there and lock them away and then be like, and by the way, you can't vote. And so I think we have this tendency to just to be like, oh, we should just put the voting online and it will fix it, and not actually deep delve into the complexity of things and to focus on early intervention and prevention instead of punishment and, closing the gap in wealth in our country and acknowledging the deep harms that have been done by colonisation and working on a path towards intergenerational healing collectively. Sorry, I'm always bringing it real down, eh? Hayden, say something funny. No, so... But yeah, I mean, we tend to treat symptoms and not root causes, and I think as long as we keep going with that approach, we will continue to have the same problems over and over again.
I've got it's not really a question, but someone said, it's great that young people participate directly, but if they don't vote, they let the old Conservatives control the agenda. I feel like, some of my good mates are older white guys, and in terms of, we can't punish the people that do vote or that do turn up, but let's say we don't get the ideal world and we don't get the quality of candidates that's fully representative of our city, that's not what this is about, but what can those councillors do to actually engage with the community voices that aren't being represented perhaps as fully on council? Not that that's our job to tell councillors how to reach people.
I think partly maybe this goes back a little bit to what you were talking about with young people with direct democracy. I just want to, as an aside, I find it quite funny that there's more people engaged in direct democracy now, because I always think the teenagers in 1968 became the boomers of today, and I'm like, oh, there's a disconnect there. I'm like, now it makes sense. But when you see Generation Zero sort of engaging people on SkyPath or something, you get this massive feedback that actually did make a difference to councillors, and that was actually the figure. I knew that.
11,115.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and the thing is, and so it was 11,000 to 100 in terms of the submissions in favour of SkyPath, and those people, most of those people, that 11,000 people that submitted probably didn't vote statistically, but the sheer overwhelming support for that probably did sway council in a lot of ways, and so there probably is that opportunity even post the election to influence things if that direct democracy is employed correctly.
And in terms of what councillors can do when that happens, is like, because I used to be a member of Generation Zero Auckland, and I remember some of my friends went for their first ever submission to Auckland Council and got yelled at, and there was this video that went viral, and they were just like, yeah, young people don't know what you're talking about. And it wasn't by the crowd, it was by councillors who disagreed with them. And so, like, if we want to, so that's one thing, that if you get in and then young people come to engage in the processes, don't yell at them. But also, I think the role of civil society organisations like Generation Zero is really important, and that's where I come back to this idea of, because the struggle for civil society organisations, because I run one and co-founded one, is funding. And so that's where I think, again, the youth participation access funding bill or something similar would really help as a structural solution to help get these groups the funding that they have, so that they can be sort of a bridge between citizens and the institutions that represent citizens. Because, I think those bridges are really, really important, but they're doing it on the side of a uni degree whilst also, a part-time job, while also trying to have some kind of social life. And what ends up happening is you just mix your social life with your activism, and that's cool, but it is also nice to not have to necessarily stress to pay the rent and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking of was my stepdaughter. She goes to school down in Lower Hutt in Wellington, and her local MP, at that time it was Trevor Mallard, came to her school, and she didn't know who he was. He talked, stood around for photos, and then left. And then the class just were interested to find out more about what he was and what he did and all that sort of thing. And I feel like it's so cliche, having worked in a minister's office before, but just if politicians, either central or local politicians, if they go to their schools, and this is also my dig about civics education, if they go to schools and meet the school students, then that will excite them, that will interest them in the political process, and about what a politician does and about what or why it's important to vote. But I just feel that there are a lot of schools. I mean, well, there's over 2,000 secondary schools in New Zealand, so that's a lot of like eating sausage rolls and drinking cups of tea that
Do
they
you
have
think
to go through.
we should lower the age to 16? It's just come through on Slido.
Yes.
Why? Who said yes? Was that you, Hayden?
I thought we all said, oh, so I thought I was saying it with everyone else. I don't ever, oh, sorry, I couldn't.
I think yes, but with the caveat of civics education in schools. You know, I'm happy for a 16-year-old to drive on the caveat that they're trained to drive, you know. So I think it's tied in one another. Without civics education in schools and without that other supporting infrastructure around it, I think I'm a bit more tentative. But you know, hey.
I think of it the same way I think about the disenfranchisement of prisoners in a sense, that we should find reasons, there should be really good reasons to disenfranchise someone out, and our first option should always be to enfranchise someone, not to disenfranchise someone. And 16-year-olds, I mean, Lord was 16 when she wrote Royals, you know, so, I mean, they're not dumb.
And all the logic around the developing brain and they're too young and they can't make good choices, unfortunately, if you put the other end of the life spectrum, you can apply much of that to. So, you know, touche.
I would never say something like that.
Also in Scotland, when they had the referendum about whether or not Scotland should leave the UK, they lowered the voting age to 16 for it, and the turnout of 16 to 17-year-olds was 75%, which is pretty awesome. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good reason to do it.
And that goes into, so my area of expertise is this little bit. If you cast a vote the first time you're given the opportunity to, a significant vote like a general election or a local body election, your children are likely to vote. If you don't cast that vote, such as the intergenerational patterns of, you know, you're more likely to
so
not.
parents can actually be quite influential.
And vice versa. Young people can also be very influential on the parents as well. So if they start to engage, you can break the cycle in both directions. But it's a really interesting thing that the I engage, I've cast that vote, I either want to see how well, you know, the person I voted for performs. So I've got a horse in the race. If the person I vote for doesn't get elected, I've got a sort of, you know, a reason to be watching what's going on. But I'm engaged, therefore I'm more likely to talk about it. Therefore my whānau are more likely to hear politics and civic discourse as it normalised. Therefore they're more likely to pay attention, and you sort of get this lovely spiral of
Culture
participation.
change.
Absolute culture change. And look, I'm looking forward to being a middle-aged Pākehā white man.
Forward?
Can I?
Hey, just because we've got about 5 minutes left before Marguerite comes on to summarise, and I'm going to give you each a chance to kind of have one last statement about this conversation. But before I do, interesting things just come in. Not everyone is motivated by doing the right thing or the fact that it's really good for us and our society. Some people are motivated by money. Do you think salary? Do you think that could be a part of enticing people to run for? Oh, Michael, you're like, oh,
You're literally the only one that's done it.
It's so tricky. Don't know. It's set, like I took a big pay cut to go and run for local body politics, which is I know is a very privileged position to be in. I think it's said about right, honestly. I think I come back to, I think people think council, particularly council, is a lot more daunting. I remember working with the youth advisory panel, and they kind of thought they needed to go through the motions before they might one day run for a local body, like for a local board or something. It's like, nah, man, just jump straight in.
Right.
Like,
We don't necessarily want people who are only going to do it for the money. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. But then on the other scale, I think there's people worth 3 times as much on the local boards or on the councils than they are in the private sector too. So it works at both ends. So I honestly feel like sometimes we could be sitting about right, because those people that probably are in more vulnerable, not in the high for them it should be it's incentivizing, and they can study and they can do. It's quite an agile job. Like, you can make it work for you and your other governors. And would I like to see better quality decision making? Yes, but does that necessarily come from a higher echelon of earners? No. So I kind of feel like it's set about right. Yeah.
Awesome. Closing statements. Who'd like to kick us off? Hayden.
Not go.
I didn't know.
Go back through.
No, go Laura. Maria.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to say that from a super diverse perspective, it's quite important to be able to get super diverse people enrolled, because that's the biggest hurdle to them not voting. We've got a group that's called New Zealand Asian Leaders, and it's a whole bunch of Asian leaders from New Zealand who met with Auckland Council this week. And they said that the majority of the issues with their communities is that nobody knows how to enrol. Because if you're not enrolled, you can't vote. So I just think we need to go back to that step of saying enrol, then vote, and what next?
Thank you, Carl.
I think we need to practice a kinder, more open and deliberative democracy. And I think we need to model better behaviour at every level, media, education. I think we need to do better, and we need to bring it back into terms of our national kaupapa, that this is a important thing we need to foreground. I think we need to have those arguments about whether or not the council sees me as a customer or a citizen. I want to be a citizen, not a customer, and that changes my relationship. So I think we need to have a good, long, hard look. And New Zealand's good. We have these little crux moments. We had awful ones in Christchurch recently, and it gives us opportunity to take a good, long, hard look at ourselves and what we want. And I'm looking forward to the moment we do that with civics and with citizenship, and find that within our sort of national discourse, that we make that space to have these really hard conversations and push things forward. One little thing I want to add is just we talk a lot about ethnic groups and age and location, but increasingly how big data is thinking about us is in terms of psychographics, in terms of mindsets. And if you drill down on the voter of non-participation, we get things like apartment dwellers and Pākehā tradies, and we get these little pockets of non-participation that are really interesting. And I think about that dense urban future Auckland city, where more and more people are going to live in apartment dwellers don't vote, and it's because they don't have neighbours and they don't feel part of a community. There's lots of reasons why they don't vote, but it's a mindset of disconnection. So I'd be really wary about just focusing on these really easy, observable demographic identifiers, and think about psychographics and who we're leaving behind psychologically, psychographically.
Thank you, Michael.
It's a really complex environment. I think there's I reckon an interesting exercise, because we're in a room full of voters, bar 4 people. Would have been really interesting exercise getting them up here and just asking them questions for an hour and a half of why they don't. I think the onus isn't on council, it's not on government. I think there's a real responsibility on us to put all our bullshit aside and understand that participation and involvement is better for representation and civic serving and all the things that we're probably a little bit wired towards. And I think we've got a large responsibility. As I say, I don't mind which way you're voting or where you are. I want to know about your intent, your values, and you might not represent my community, but I think you need to be around that decision-making table. So I'd sort of particularly for the audience, I think it's not about trying to get non-voters to vote, but I think it's more about getting voting people to encourage voting. And I think that's probably my last message. You always hear about how do we get non-voters to vote. I think we play a far larger part in influencing other people to vote than thinking about council, government, and all that. So that's probably the last thing.
I just want to say that local government is cool and it is interesting and it is not boring. Please stop telling me that. It is, though. It is. I mean, we're so beaten down about local government. Oh my God, I voted in the council election. And we just say, oh, have you thought about it? It's actually quite interesting. And the people who participated in it are mostly kind of crazy. And the barriers to entry are so low that you get a really interesting mix of people involved in it. I just want to preach to I just want to be an advocate for local government being an actually interesting thing to write about and study, and maybe hopefully one day there'll be a story on the spin-off or something that will reflect that. But there's also a lot of intractable social issues and different things that we've covered about why young people don't vote. And I endorse all those as well while I'm saying this stupid stuff.
Thank you, Hayden. Laura.
So I started off, I'm going to try and bring it back to what I started off with, which is like one of the complex reasons, and I'm going to focus on Māori. One of the complex reasons that Māori don't vote, as I've said, is because of intergenerational distrust of the Crown because of our colonial history and present. Right now in Auckland, we have a peaceful occupation or resistance happening in Ihu Mātao. One of the reasons that that situation exists now is because land that was confiscated in 1863, when it became available for sale a couple hundred years, 100 and something years later, rather than the Crown buying it back to gift it back to the Māori from whom it was taken, gave it to Auckland Council, and then Auckland Council made that area a special housing area, which Auckland Council, to their credit, has recently expressed regret for that decision. My wero, my challenge to you all, is to read the history of Ihu Mātao, to visit the land if you can, or if you haven't already, and to recognise that the treaty relationship is not just between the Crown and Māori, but it's between Pākehā and Māori, or tauiwi, non-Māori and Māori, and that we all have an obligation to learn about the treaty, honour the treaty, and try and live as best we can in relationship with tangata whenua.
Thank you. Just a question before I close the session. The people that haven't voted, could I get your hands up? Has the stuff you've heard tonight, does that make you want to vote this time round? Awesome.
We did it, guys! Let's go!
What was your answer? Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, please show some love for our panellists tonight. Laura O'Connell-Rapira, Carl Kane, Marina Matthews, Michael Gowdy, and Hayden Donnell. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone that put a question through and for listening.